my first tip to people would be pivot your value prop, if you will, to your buyer's new normal without mentioning the new normal. You know, so a great example of that is beforehand, pre-COVID, I was talking all about how course could help your sellers get better, coaching, etc. Post-COVID, I pivoted all the messaging to how you can hold your reps accountable during remote selling. How you can keep cross collaboration up while they're working from home. How you can do remote coaching. So I understood that all of these enterprise reps, I'm envisioning some like field rep over at Oracle, and all of a sudden, instead of going door to door and knocking down these doors, they're at home with their kids all over them and their dogs like barking and their wives yelling at them to go to the store or whatever. And like, how can you enable that rep? So I think people need to put down the existing value prop, put down, what you were selling previously, and understand your buyer's new normal, and enter into that reality and say, how can I enable them in this new time, new reality?
Let me play, not devil's advocate, but let me give you a challenge. Let's say you're WeWork.
Yeah. No advice.
And that brings me to my first tip, which is it depends on what you're selling.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're selling personal protection equipment and masks, or are you selling shared office space?
Right.
And if you're sharing shared office space, not a good idea to pick up the phone and sell shared office space. But what you could do as a salesperson are some other things. You could, without having an intent to upsell, call your existing customers and literally go in there just to see how they're doing. And I got to tell you, Becc, I don't know if you felt this as well. I've never had deeper conversations with people when I'm cold calling or when I'm talking to existing customers. Like, people just want to talk. They are isolated. If you show just the least a bit that you have cared, and Becc, you do this really well, where you're looking at something about them that you noticed, do a little bit of that research that Becc suggests during her Flip the Script, and call your customers and just don't have an intent and just see how they're doing. And maybe something comes out of that you can help them with, a little book that you could send in the mail, just thinking of you. Another tip, if you're the WeWorks of the world, get to know your audience better. You can never know your prospects well enough. What were they doing before they switched over to WeWork? Like, how did they know to start looking and start to capture those, interesting nuggets? Interview them and put them on your own show on LinkedIn. And turn those interviews into a book. It's a great opportunity for you to get smarter about your prospects if you are in the bucket of, WeWork. And I'm not picking on WeWork. Obviously, I'm using it as an example, but things that just wouldn't be a fit. So that's my first tip.
Right. I think that's interesting because I have seen a lot of companies, at least the companies that are very, very self-aware, they're running that playbook, the nurture playbook, the value add, the deposit to the affected industries, let's call them. Anyone who's doing layoffs, anyone who's, doing massive budget cuts, etc. And the interesting thing is, I would argue that's how you should always be selling. And it takes the pressure off the rep, that they're like, oh my gosh, now I'm just here to add value.
You make a great point. Why is everyone talking about empathy as if it's something that we do now?
Right. Well, the other one is personalization. They're like, now you know who your buyer is. I'm like, hey, I'll take it where I can get it at this point. I'm like, if you're finally going to do research, regardless of, because that's, COVID or something awful like COVID or some purple dragon that's outside your window, like, you're doing it, that's great. And so it takes the pressure off the rep. And I think it will be interesting to see the selling world post-COVID, because I think a lot of reps will get into these really healthy practices of nurturing and adding value and starting conversations and having no agenda and, listening for understanding someone and being their advocate and being empathetic and entering into their experience. And I think it will get them in that habit. And then hopefully post-COVID, it continues on, and they realize that that's actually even net fiscally a better way to sell.
Love that. What's your next tip?
My next tip is, I'm going to go the selling motion now. I would suggest that anyone who has a deal mid-cycle that you need to multi-thread and get the CFO involved. Let me tell you why. Your CFO, whether we like it or not, is now our new buyer, because regardless of your ICP, in my experience, it's like, okay, I'm selling into a VP of sales. The VP of sales is, usually the decision maker. They have budget. They're all excited. They see the value, et cetera. And then they're about to sign on the dotted line. COVID hits, budgets roll back. And now the CFO is scrutinizing every single purchase that is made because of those budget cuts. And so if you leave your CFO out and say they're not important, then essentially all you're left with is a quote unquote champion now, even though it was previously your decision maker. So I would suggest to all the sellers out there on the line that you understand who the CFO is. You look at them as a new buyer. Of like, typically whenever I'm meeting with a champion or I'm meeting with an influencer within the organization, I realize that my meeting, the whole goal of it is to get the right to pitch to the decision maker of like, I want to, arm them with information. I want to understand what their perspective is, but I am now viewing my CFO as they are also a new buyer. So I need to find a way to, multi-thread, have a meeting with them, understand where their mind's at, and then help enable them with the data, asking the right questions. They're a separate buyer, and they're an equally as important buyer regardless of who you're selling into across the org.
I love that one. And have you ever considered, I'm sure you have, creating like these CFO packets where you're kind of bottling up what a CFO would like to see with regards to how your champion can kind of sell this up? Because sometimes, I don't know if you found this, Becc, but I have found sometimes my champions don't know how to sell to a CFO, and that's on you as a rep. Like, you got to figure that out. And what I used to do is create these little, I'd walk over to my CFO and I'd say, what the hell do you need? What are you looking for? And we'd create these little packets and we'd create a video, teach our champions, and then we just package it up and send it to the CFO with like a little letter.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that's really, really smart of how to sell, because it's not really your champion's responsibility to learn how to sell your product.
I don't know if this has happened to you, Becc, but when this all started happening, I literally had 3 deals that were about to close. I got the email, which I'm sure a lot of people have gotten, which is, hey, everything's frozen right now. Chris actually recommended a 3-step framework that I'll share with you very quickly that I used. And all 3 of these deals came back and ended up closing. Now, would they have happened anyway? I don't know, but it felt really good to deliver. Yeah. And it's good to have in your toolbox for these types of situations. This is not someone lying to you to get out of a deal. Just want to preface this. I know Becc and I have talked about objections before. This is not that. These are deals that you've been working a long time. There's a lot of trust established. That's just in the final stages. And they call you and say, hey, due to the pandemic, we're freezing budgets. I get on the phone. And step number 1 is I just let them talk. And when they're done talking, I'll say something like this, it sounds like this is a real shit show. And you're afraid that your reps aren't going to be able to sell into your targeted accounts. And therefore, the last thing you want to do is invest money in a sales trainer if your reps aren't going to be able to even get conversations with who they want to get in front of. And what I did at the end is the hardest part. Chris calls it silence. And just be quiet. And they're going to start to talk. And they're going to just start to say things like, oh my God, that's exactly right. That's it. And they're going to talk and talk. And then you might mirror, meaning you might repeat the last 3 words that they said. And they'll keep talking. And you let that stew for a little bit. So the first thing is called just tactical empathy. You label it. You mirror it. And then the third thing is the most powerful thing. After they've had an opportunity to talk and vent, you ask what Chris calls a calibrated question. Yeah. And a calibrated question is one in which the adversary, not really the adversary, but the person on the other side, you enlist their help to solve the problem. So they feel in control. And so what it sounded like for me was, hey, John, how can we work together so that you come out on top when this is over? And it's just a great way to have a conversation. He laid it all out. I continued to make a couple deposits here and there, and they came right back. Yeah. So it's a great tool to have in your toolbox.